It is 7:03. Oh. Well, excuse me. We'll call this meeting to order. It is 7:03. Let's see. It is August 22nd, 2022, and this is the 7th public meeting of the City of Portland's Police Accountability Commission Subcommittee on Research. The closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance. Please know that this is an automatic captioning service and is not always accurate. But please note that it's not always accurate. The city supports access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other language support as well. Please email in advance of future meetings, either as a response to a public meeting notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for other access assistance, including interpretation in other languages. This meeting is a public meeting subject to the City of Portland's Administrative Code and Oregon State law and is being recorded. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for commissioners to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be able to ask questions using the Zoom Q&A feature. As the commissioners are presenting and or discussing things, if attendees have a question, please feel free to submit it through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversation during the meeting and future meeting agenda topics. We'd like to be clear that not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both the question and answer will be visible to you and will become part of the meeting's record. To access this feature, just click on the Q&A icon in the middle of your screen. And Victoria, I'd love for you to do the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Ayomide. This land acknowledgement is in behalf of the PAC. The Portland metro area rests on traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molala, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. Indigenous people have created communities and summer encampments to harvest and enjoy the plentiful natural resources of the area for the last 11,000 years. We want to recognize that Portland today is a community of many diverse Native people who continue to live and work here. We respectfully acknowledge and honor all Indigenous communities, past, present, and future, and are grateful for their ongoing and vibrant presence. We also acknowledge the systematic policies of genocide, relocation, and assimilation that still impact many Indigenous Native American families today. As settlers and guests on these lands, we respect the work of Indigenous leaders and families and pledge to make ongoing efforts to recognize their knowledge, creativity, and resilience. Ayomide, you are unmute. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take this moment to read the community agreements, and then after we do the community agreements, we get agreement from people. I'll have the Spanish interpreter speak Spanish, do the Spanish portion of the intro. So we have community agreements that we created earlier, and just take a moment to read these. You can go to the next slide. With a show of hands, can I see if folks agree to this, to these agreements? Okay, Debbie. Okay, yay, fabulous. Okay, and before we go on to the next thing, Thalia, would you mind reading the interpretation for Spanish, please? Oh,
Sorry, I cannot see the.
I'm gonna put it, sorry. Share screen. Is this this is usually the slide we always put when you do Spanish. Cuando habla español y da la información, esta es la slide que tenemos. Talia, yo puedo leerlo en español si usted gusta. O no sé, como usted considere.
Ok, sí, sí, sí lo puede leer, por favor, es que no lo encuentro.
Sí, no se
Estoy-
preocupe. Yo lo voy a leer, lo voy a traducir porque lo tengo en inglés, pero yo lo voy a traducir. Bueno,
Ok, está bien.
¿sí? Ok.
Mm.
Buenas tardes a todos. Este es una junta pública que está sujeta a la ley del estado de Oregon y a la ciudad y a la administración de la ciudad de Portland bajo las reglas y se va a grabar. La gente que necesite traducción en español está disponible, gracias a Thalia que está aquí. Cuando quiera tener acceso a la traducción en español, usted puede ver lo que dicen en el video, la gente que está hablando. Si por favor, para tener ese acceso, hágale un clic al mundo que está o a la ruedita que está abajo, donde dice la interpretación de la lengua, language interpretation, en the Zoom meeting y en los controles abajo de su pantalla y seleccione español.
thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Thalia, for being our interpreter. And I will pass over to the co-chairs to discuss the timeline for today.
Thank you very much. I'm Angie Tomlinson, Commissioner Angie, and the commission is currently in the fact-finding phase of work, expected to go into early September. It includes hearing from key stakeholders, identifying barriers to accountability in Portland presently, and examining systems of accountability from other jurisdictions and proposals from subject matter experts. Hold on one second because I need... Oh, I can't get this to move. I'm sorry. Thank you. It also includes increased community engagement work. Future phases of work will develop the parameters for new police accountability system before the commission presents that to the City Council in 2023 for their consideration and approval. Could you move to slide 7, please? Thank you. Following today's meeting, here are the next several upcoming meetings of the PAC. This subcommittee will meet again on August 29th. The PAC meets on Thursday, August 25th. The commission will not meet over Labor Day. And just so everybody knows tonight that's here, we appreciate you being here. There is a good chance that we might end early tonight though. Finally, if we can move to slide 8, thank you so much. This slide is the current project plan for the fact-finding phase of the Police Accountability Commission's work. It's not the agendas and it's updated regularly. This slide is mostly for members of the public to be able to understand how the commission gets from now through the end of the phase, which focuses on identifying areas of agreement among commission members as to barriers to accountability in the current system, best practices from Portland and other jurisdictions, and suggestions to consider from experts, as well as taking public comment and meeting with key stakeholders. Today's meeting is in the green box towards the bottom right of the screen with the purple border. As part of completing the fact-finding phase, the full commission will consider the ideally approve 3 documents which are listed on this page. The first 2 are being developed in this subcommittee for eventual referral to the full commission, where they will be discussed again before being approved. The third, which focuses on barriers to police accountability in the current system in Portland, as well as best practices in Portland, is being developed at the full commission level through this phase as well. Now we'll review today's meeting purpose. Today's meeting agenda focuses on the first two draft documents just mentioned, which are being developed in this subcommittee and eventually referred to the full commission for their approval. They are draft areas of agreement on best practices and practices to avoid from other jurisdictions, as well as the draft areas of agreements on suggestions to consider and proposals to avoid from subject matter experts. We will spend most of our time discussing the draft documents. During these discussions, members may also reference any of the documents posted in the PAC website under Subcommittee on Research and Resources. There will also be public comment during today's meeting.
Thank you, Angie. And now to slides 11 and 12, I will pass it to Ayomire.
Thank you. Before we get started, are there any new research notes to be presented or updated for previous research that any of the subcommittee members would like to present today? So any new updates or any new information from members from research, from the research reports? Just want to make sure that there's no updates. Okay, great. All right, moving on then. Thank you. Discussion on draft areas and agreements on best practices and practices to avoid from other jurisdictions. Let's see. Today, we will screen share the draft of areas of agreement document and best practices to avoid from other jurisdictions. For each entry into this document, we will be asking if members believe if it's a good practice from another jurisdiction and support the PAC designating it as such. No decision is anticipated on this document today, and we will not be able to get through the whole entire document today, but flagging items which are effectively consensus ideas, but which might not need wordsmithing, or items which need more discussion because they're not yet having consensus. Will help ensure subcommittee and eventually the PAC will complete this document and move on to the next phase of work. This is an open discussion. We will ask you to follow our normal discussion rules. Please be brief each time you speak, even though you can speak multiple times. Please be facilitated, and remember that you are now I'm using a weighted stack, and I'm in our discussion. Finally, please be forward looking in our comments who the co-chairs like to describe. Who of the co-chairs would like to describe the draft and get the decision going, or the discussion going? Angie or Sophia? Oh, well, Sophia's not there. So would you like to start? I guess we would need the document up.
So are we going to be working on the document or the Excel spreadsheet? I thought we were starting with Excel spreadsheet. No?
This sheet. Oh, wait.
Just a moment, sorry.
The spreadsheet is what we're starting with, this spreadsheet. Yes.
We would be starting with the spreadsheet. I think everyone
And-
here. Oh, I'm sorry.
were-
What we can.
Oh, and we were going to start at the bottom, I think. So if someone could scroll down.
And Sophia, I can let you talk if you would like.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're decided to start at the bottom. I know we did a little bit of work earlier in our last meeting, just to kind of get some ideas. So we decided not to start at the top. We'll start at the bottom so that we don't have to recover the same material again unnecessarily. But today's the point today is for us to go through and look at each one of these to decide if this is something that we want to keep as a commission, as a best practice or a practice to avoid. Not necessarily to debate on whether it's good or bad. For the sake of time, we want to be able to just check off what we like and what we don't like. And if there's something
Since Sophia is cutting out,
that
basically.
needs to work, I have to come back. Right.
Ooh. Sophia?
Oh, okay, I'm here. Is my internet connection working?
Yeah, your internet connection isn't the greatest right now. So I don't mind kind of recapping what you were going to say. So basically, as we're going through this document, we're just going to be making notes or flags, and further discussion will happen at another date after they've been categorized in categories to figure out for further discussion. So we will not be having lengthy discussions, but if there is any, quick comments, that of course will be allowed just for the sake of time, since there's so many that we have to get through today. Does that sound about right, Sophia? Okay, great. Are there any questions before we start? Okay, great. All right. Civil Service Commission use per respondent and evidence on appeal. County San Diego notable, the CRC has told they cannot use preponderance because they are appellated body. Dan, this is your note. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, so what this is saying is that there is an appeal body in San Diego County that uses the preponderance of evidence, and the Citizen Review Committee here has been forced to use a deferential standard called the reasonable person standard for all these years. So there is a precedent that there is, preponderance of the evidence can be made in these findings. The other two are kind of the lower level findings. And it's hard for us to discuss this without thinking about the broader structure about what is getting created by the charter. But in theory, the new board is going to be hearing the lower level cases, and right now there's no community body that does that. But the police officer's boss, their commander, and other people who review the case have to use preponderance of the evidence. So that's what these other boards use, and I call that best practice. I also just want to, just for the couple of people in the audience today, just make clear that we got this finalized spreadsheet about an hour ago, and I was busy doing something else, so I haven't really had a chance to look over the whole thing. But I'll do the best I can. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to flag this item for further discussion? Commissioner Debbie.
So when you say for further discussion, does that mean that we're going to keep this on the list of things we want to include in our recommendations to the full committee? Or we, like, you know, I've been observing the Citizen Review Committee for a long time, and I definitely agree with this, but I don't know if that's what you're asking. So what's the question right now?
So yes, it's basically, do you want to discuss this any further? Either way, whether
Okay.
yeah.
I want
So,
to. I want to
be
make sure
flagged.
this. Yeah, I want to make sure this gets into our final recommendation from this subcommittee, if that's okay to say that. Yeah.
Yep. So basically make a note of that. This is one that is for further discussion. Monica?
I'm a little tiny bit concerned that we are not going to have time to go through every line and decide whether we want to keep it or not. We have 387 lines. So is there a way that we could move this a little bit faster? If this process could be done a little bit faster?
I was actually going to possibly read all of these, I guess, or get support in reading most of these. But I see that staff has your hand up. You have any suggestions?
Yeah, so process that the subcommittees historically used earlier, as well as the full commission, was essentially reading them, and if there's a question, then opening it up to the commissioner or commissioners who explained it, as Commissioner Dan just did for that one. And then otherwise, if there's someone who'd like to discuss it, then we'd flag it, and otherwise we'd move on without needing anything more than just a quick read on it. And to clarify the question, the guidance I was given going into this was that essentially you should assume that it's going to be put in as a best practice if it says best practice here, unless someone says they want to flag it. So if you're seeing it say best practice and you'd like it to be reflected, as Commissioner Debbie just indicated, then feel free to just no need to say anything. We can just move on to the next item. And if it's that, I'm not sure if it should be a best practice or something like that, then that's what it means to flag it for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, staff, for making that clarification. Commissioner Monica, you have a response?
Could we maybe all of us in our own read what is up on the screen and think about it on our own, and then if something comes up as something that we need to discuss, instead of reading line by line, you know, out loud, just reading it and then move, once we're all done with that first page, and just move down to the next page and do the same thing.
Commissioner, Co-Chair Sophia?
Yes. So are you suggesting just let's look at what's on the page? And then if there's any contesting, then we flag and then move on to the next section of the page? Okay.
Can I make another suggestion?
Sure.
That of the ones that folks are flagging, if they could put them in the chat, and then I can read off, I can see which ones they are, and then I can read those ones off specifically.
The other issue is reading those off. I do think we should read them just for the public and others, so that they can know what we're looking at and discussing. I know it's going to take a little more time, but for the sake of the transparency, We could just read them all off quickly. And then each individual at the time can flag or not flag something. So we can go by line items when you want to flag something. Is that better?
Commissioner Dan?
Yes, I didn't introduce myself before. I'm Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a member of the commission. And I agree with co-chair Glenn there. And I think that rather than read everything that's on the screen, if we just read the heading and then the practices, and the jurisdictions and justification can be jumped into if we need to discuss the things further. I think that the issues are the practices themselves. I just want to also mention that I'm one of the few white people on this commission. I'm one of the only white men on this commission. And so I wrote a lot of things as practice to consider and not best practice, because I didn't want to impose my opinion on everybody else. But I am hoping that a lot of those practices that I flagged as things to consider will make it to the final document with the support of other commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Handelman. So are we in agreement in this particular situation? Well, I'll read, or me and the co-chairs, because I know my mouth will eventually want to fall off if I have to read all these myself. We'll read the title or the bolded and the practices. And then folks can let me know if they have any need for flagging of each item. Is there a consensus on that? Great, thank you. Okay. Fabulous. All right, let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger because I am having a hard time seeing, so bear with me just a moment. Thank you, whoever did that magnifying, wonderful. Okay, so we'll start with the bottom ones that I was just at. Actually, we just did, let's see. We did 387, so we'll go to 386, preponderance of the evidence used for board findings based on evidence at a hearing / investigative record, excuse me. And this is standard of review, and then preponderance of the evidence used for board findings. And if I hear nothing, I'm going to assume we can just move on. Right. And because I'm having to look at the full screen, I can't always see people's hands if they're raising their hands. So please feel free to use your voice if you need to, just because I cannot see you. Okay, chief / police commissioner required to implement / response. Commissioner can accept, modify, or reject findings made by panel, but can be refer case to full board. And then commissioner has the final say on discipline. Board's recommendations are not binding. And I would say these not necessarily appropriate, but want to just put them, just make sure folks know that someone put them in there. So not necessarily appropriate. Yes, go ahead, staff.
Commissioner Dan, if I may clarify, would the relationship between not necessarily appropriate and practice to avoid be similar to as you described the relationship between, are you suggesting not necessarily appropriate might be worth this subcommittee designating as practice to avoid? Is that what that meant, or was there another definition for not necessarily appropriate?
Yes, thank you very much for asking that question. Yeah, that was my equivalent of not wanting to label things, you know, as something to avoid without having other people put their eyes on it first. But yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to double check. Everybody good? All right. Going back. Ooh, I almost lost more of the screen. Let's see. No, I don't want that. Okay. computers. Oh, where are you? Hold on. Sorry, guys. I just lost y'all. Okay. Victoria, can you read the next section? Because I need to get my screen.
Sure.
Things again. Sorry about that, y'all.
The next section is location of office. Office is not where internal affairs or the mayor are housed. Office is separate from police, and City Hall opens 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. to take complaints. Board has own offices in Manhattan, can do interviews in each of the 5 boroughs. Board has office outside sheriff's office, but maybe in building with security provided by sheriff's deputies. And all those 4 are practice to consider. And Commissioner Dan raised his hand. Go ahead.
So just, if you look at some of the other notes that I put in here, the 8 to 5 hours, I think, are too limited. But I think having an office that's separated from everything else, I think that's actually part of the charter. And then actually having, you know, the number, line 379 about the sheriff's office, I think we should be careful to make sure that if there's going to be security for the new board's office, that that's not done by police or sheriff's law enforcement. So it's, you know, so it's kind of a mixed bag of a good practice with something to avoid, perhaps.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Okay, so I think we need to scroll up a little bit. Thank you. Okay. Okay, location of office. All right. So committee work, internal structures is the next section. Committees, and we'll go from the bottom. Thank you. Board adopts rules by majority vote, must be approved by county board of supervisors, reviewed every 4 years. Robert's rule of order except as provided by board rules. Chair president presides, votes, ensures lawful, is spokesperson, signs documents, designates subcommittees, and can sit in on subcommittees. Vice chair acts as chair in their absence. Chair pro temp acts as chair if both chair, vice chair absent. Secretary keeps record of proceedings. Custodian of records keeps roll, certifies quorum, maintains list of members. And this is a practice of consideration. 372, board determines investigative procedures. Members cannot abstain unless there is a conflict of interest. These are all practices to consider. Okay. 369, Robert's rules. Sorry, you moved. There we go. Robert's, oh, thank you, Sophia. I can see your hand. Commissioner Sophia.
Yeah, I'm not sure what Robert's rule is.
It's a form of operating a meeting. Robert's rules. Commissioner Dan, did you want to further explain?
Yeah, so I think in Portland and in Oregon, Robert's rules is a kind of meeting rules that are default, like we have consensus here in the commission, and it's a thing that defaults where technically the chair is not supposed to vote. A motion has to be made before there's a discussion, and then there's a vote based on whatever motion was put on the floor. But the important thing about what I included, which is now off the screen again, is that even though Robert's rules is the default, you can write something else in for the rules for the review board. And that's true here in Portland and whatever city that was that we were looking at a second ago. So does that make sense, Commissioner Glenn? That they're very rigid and very old white men in cigar-filled rooms kind of rules that I think we want to try to not stick with if we can avoid it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Okay, can we have the list back up, please? Okay. So we were at 369, which is Robert's Rules requires a motion to initiate a discussion. Not needed for board. These are practices to consider. Commissioner can submit proposal 10 days before a meeting to modify rules. Bylaws can be amended to 2/3 vote. Rules of order, administrative rules, internal processes, and operational and standing rules interface with the city by majority. And that's 367. 366. In general, board members can speak about their roles, but chair is the spokesperson. 365, votes are taken by roll call, not voice vote, with members explaining abstentions. Those are, again, practices consider. Would anyone like to flag any of these items for further discussion? Sophia, Commissioner Sophia.
I'd like to flag the Roberts Rule. I'd like to look into that a little more personally.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, let's see. Executive committee is made up of cabinets and chairs of subcommittee. That's 364. 366, vice chair, second vice chair move up and higher ranking officer if a ranking officer resigns. Parliamentary consults on procedures, but chair makes ruling. Cabinet is made of chair. Spokespersons can delegate, runs meetings, coordinates communication, appoints committee members, coordinates case review teams, can join teams. Vice chair leads in absence of chair. Trains new members. Second vice chair leads in absence of chair / vice chair. Acts as I can't say it. Dan, Commissioner Dan.
Sorry, my mic was unmuted. So yeah, the word's parliamentarian, and it's it's a very important role that that somebody is paying attention to the rules and making sure that as the board is doing its business, that they're following all the rules. And that's called the parliamentarian. It could be called something else, but that's what they call it. It also occurs to me that I don't mind reading the spreadsheet from the bottom to the top. I think we should probably go from the top to the bottom in each subsection, because when I typed up my notes, I assumed that you had read the lines above before you get to, so the mention of parliamentarian in line 362 is a reference back to line 361. So
yeah,
I don't know if it's throw you off your
it's not, it won't. I think it was just because we couldn't see it when it was coming up from the bottom. We couldn't see that particular portion. So it's just the way that person is scrolling right now. Thank you.
So I just wonder if we can, start at the top of each section and read down from, starting in the next section, maybe.
Yes, I will try that with the starting of the next section. So thank you for your comments on that, because I was able to say it the first time, but I couldn't say it the second time for some reason. Okay, let's see. So we are at 360. Standing committees are executive, functioning of board, policy, education, setup, presentation for board meetings, community outreach, rules, bylaws and operating rules, recruitment and training. And then 359, committees have no more than 7 people in them, it's supposed to say, but I think it says on them. And then committees can be standing or ad hoc. Chairs remain for 1 year standing, full mission, ad hoc, meetings held quarterly or more frequently. And that is 358. And this is, of course, from committee work and internal structures. Would anyone like to flag any of these items for further discussion? Staff. Well, actually, before staff, Commissioner Glenn. So Commissioner Sophia.
I was waiting for staff. I'm sorry.
Oh, I said before staff and then I said yes. So sorry about that.
I'll let staff go. Thank you.
Okay, okay, thanks.
I just have
Staff.
a clarifying question. Was line 359 also from San Diego City? This might have been on a mistake on the consolidation side, but I just wanted to clarify with Commissioner Dan on this one because the stuff before and after are both dance. Figured I'd ask.
Yeah, thanks. I'm actually looking up that. I'm looking that up right now to see what I can find. Thanks. I'll put it in the chat when I find the answer.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Commissioner Glenn.
So I just, it's just a comment in general. These are all things to consider. I mean, there's a lot there. And just to note that I'm sure there's probably going to be some other things as well. But some of these things are a bit technical. I know that's how Dan runs, but I'm all for it. I'm not trying to flag it. I'm just suggesting that we go into them further as we consider them. That's all. It's not flagged. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. We were at meeting content other than hearings. That's the next chunk. And there seems to be only one. It says excused absences can be for unseen events, health reasons, out of town, conflict of interest. Commissioner Sophia. No,
That was an accident. I didn't put
that's
it.
an accident. Okay. Would anyone like to flag this item for further discussion? Commissioner Dan.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons this struck me as important is that we struggled with this question on our commission about what's an excused absence or not, and having a list like that might be helpful to start the new board off if they, if we can provide something like that for them. So yes, I would like to flag that and maybe include it.
Thank you. Okay. So we are on 354. Okay. So board compensation. 352, board is reimbursed for authorized, reasonable, and necessary expenses. 353, compensated per term. Some decide to do work pro bono. And then 354, board is reimbursed for expenses. Would anyone like to flag this item or any of these items for further discussion? Commissioner Glenn?
Yes. And this is something that I haven't put into the spreadsheet yet, but it was on one of the, it was from one of the city of Fort Worth. It's not in the spreadsheet yet, that our board members should actually be paid. They suggested that, but I just wanted to flag that for just further discussion. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, can you scroll? Okay, city council involvement. Mayor can make decisions if board disagrees with police proposed findings. Mayor conducts review of process, tends to complaints, excuse me, investigations and discipline. City council must vote on removal of board member within 60 days. County board of supervisors can send a case back to the board for reconsideration. At this point, their practices consider. Would anyone like to flag this item for further discussion? Or these items? Okay, I don't see any hands. Let's move forward. Okay. Okay, appeal processes. If officer is dissatisfied, they can rebut within 30 days. Supervisors cannot file on officer's behalf. Late findings not accepted. Appeal is to civil service commission as defined in collective bargaining agreement. Community members can request an investigative hearing, sorry. Compliant or officer can appeal. Panel chair or executive director can reopen case based on new evidence such as witnesses or if it will serve justice. And then appeals can be made even if a complaint wasn't investigated, if a complaint wasn't investigated, if circumstances in DH 2 to 4 are met. I'm going to stop there for a moment. That's 335. Would anyone like to flag any of these items for further discussion? Commissioner Handelman?
So just as a historical note, when the Citizen Review Committee was first created, and this is one of the things I described when we talked about best practices, not meaning throwing everything out. They brought forward a practice from the old Portland Review Board, the PAC, where a person who had their complaint basically dismissed when they tried to appeal it could bring that forward, or when they tried to file it, they could bring it forward to the committee so that an investigation would happen. This line item would allow for that perhaps to happen with the new board. Obviously we don't know what the workload is going to be like for them, and there are criteria there that says that the person has to come forward and say, I have this evidence that you didn't look at, or something like that, to make it possible. But I think that's one of the frustrations that I know happens over the years with people who file complaints, that they feel that they have a valid complaint and it gets dismissed, and then they have nowhere to go. There's no appeal mechanism for it. So I just want to flag that part of this, an appeal for a case that does not get investigated.
Thank you, Commissioner Handelman. Can we screen share the document again? And I believe that is one that he wanted flagged. Thank you so much. Okay, appeals can be made even if, okay, I've already done that one. Appeals must be filed within 30 days of finding, but exceptions can be made. Appeal is heard by same panel that the original case appeal is heard by the same by same panel that heard original case because the appeal has to include new information. If a member has left the board or is unavailable, others can be assigned to the appeal. Complainants or officer has 10 days to appeal but needs to include new evidence. Complainant and can object to dismissal of case. Apparently, an officer can too, but it's not clear why they would, end quote. Commissioner Dan.
Right, so I just, the one about the same panel that heard the original case hearing the appeal.
Yes.
What I wrote in the justification box there is that we have to consider whether that is fair. On the one hand, you know, if you have a separate panel that's doing appeals, they get fresh eyes on the case. On the other hand, if it's all they're doing is considering it because there's new evidence, then it might make sense to have the people who already read the case hear the appeal so that they're not starting from scratch and have to go back and do all that extra work. So I want to flag that. That's something we should probably ask the Citizen Review Committee about as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Those items have been flagged. And my 340, is that where I am? No, 341. Thank you. Board can reopen case if it's in the public interest. Officers can appeal to Civil Service Commission. Board gets copy of appeal and has to file statement about misconduct and supporting evidence 15 days before the civil service hearing, can attend and subpoena witnesses, present evidence, and cross-examine. That's all 343 and 342 and 343. 344, an officer can appear at an appeal hearing, subpoena witnesses, present evidence, and cross-examine, can refuse to answer, I think it's supposed to say due to possible self-incrimination, but that can be considered by the commission, in their decision. And then 345, findings of civil servant commissions are final. Those are all practices to consider. Commissioner Dan.
So we have a Civil Service Commission here in Portland, or Civil Service Board. I've never heard of a police officer bringing an appeal to them. I think that either they have appealed to the Citizen Review Committee, which is very rare, or they have filed a grievance or gone to arbitration. But because that process exists here, I want to examine this idea that the board would have a role at that appeal hearing, so that it's not just whoever's running the Civil Service Board taking the officer's case and saying, okay, this is what these other people said, but that the board themselves might be able to sit at the table for that appeal if the appeals aren't going to be happening completely under their umbrella. And this might be something that we need to flag to the city attorney about, you know, what officers' rights are as far as that kind of appeal, and whether they can bypass a board appeal process and go right to the Civil Service Board. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, your hand's still up, Commissioner Dan. I just want to let you know. Yeah, I know. I just wanted to let you know because I know you need to go down. Fabulous. Would Victoria or any of the co-chairs like to take a chance at reading some of these? My eyes need a moment.
Yeah.
We're getting close to break time anyway, because it's almost 8 o'clock. I also wanted to put that there too. So,
Commissioner Sophia, Angie, you want to read or you want me to read?
Doesn't matter. I can read the next time around. We're gonna have a lot more to read.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. The next one is time frame for investigating complaints. The 325 is informal complaints are to be completed in 30 days, 60 days if it leads to formal investigation. 326, formal complaints have to be completed in 90 days. 327, complaints must be done in a year, but they can be extended. And that's the only one that say not necessarily appropriate. And then the last one, this practice to consider, complaints must be done in 1 year or they are closed. That investigations are prioritized and can take longer. Again, from everyone I read, there were all practice to consider, but the number 327, they say complaints must be done in a year, but they can be extended. Commissioner Debbie?
Well, I just have a question about this one about complaints must be done in 1 year or they are closed. Because I read that thing about in California, they have a statute of limitations on their complaints. And if they're not done investigating, then they just go away no matter what happened. And so it seems to me that isn't a practice we want to consider. So I just, because then that means that, again, if there was a incident of concern, that means that once the year goes by, then they just are, they disappear.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Dunn?
Yeah, I think, I put in some 200 lines into the spreadsheet, and I probably should have split this 328 into 2 separate lines, because I don't agree with finishing in 1 year or closing them. I think we should, now the numbers are going to be different, but I think that the death investigations prioritizing and having a longer time frame, that's what I meant was something to consider. So that's one of the reasons I tried to only consolidate things when they made sense to consolidate, so that you wouldn't think that I was suggesting a practice like shutting a complaint down after a year, especially because the line above it says the exact opposite thing. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. And then next.
I think because we just did one chunk, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we are at a great stopping place because it's 8 o'clock.
Okay.
We can take a break. I'll say 10 minutes just to kind of give people time to do all the necessary things. So we'll see you at 8:10. Thank you very much. All right. Victoria, do you want to continue?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Okay, the next is about findings. And 316 is formal and informal investigations lead to letters written to complainant, copied to internal affairs, that's practice to consider. Officer involved shootings, only finding is whether officer is in or out of policy. Procedural findings also possible, and that one is not necessarily appropriate. And then 318 findings, sustained violation, not sustained insufficient evidence, unfounded act did not occur, exonerated action justified, legal and proper, other investigation revealed violations and of other policies, practice to consider. And then 319 findings, improper conduct, sustained, proper conduct and policy, unfounded insufficient evidence. Also, non-officer related findings of policy failure, supervisory failure, training failure. Options also include informational, no in jurisdiction, withdrawal, no finding, cannot identify officer or no longer employ. Yes, practice to consider. And the last one right now highlighted is 320. Once closed, letter goes to complainant with outcome. Practice to consider. Again, where all that I read, practice to consider, the only one was 317. Commissioner Dunn?
All right, so we're going to see a lot of different iterations of this basic same 4 findings, but at some point, somebody has to decide what the findings in Portland are going to be, and I think it would be helpful for us to propose those as they move forward. We do have 4 findings here, and I've said many times, but I'll say it again, that the finding of that's called not sustained is just creates a lot of confusion because there are 3 findings that are not sustained, and so they should really call it something else. But there's also a note in the one from San Francisco that just got read about the findings of policy failure and training failure. That is something that was recommended by Eileen Luna Firebaugh for Portland. And even though there's those kind of exist, but they don't exist on the level where the community member knows that they got considered. So I like the idea of including those in a formal list of findings.
Thank you, Commissioner. Then we want to continue after we start with 321 findings. Sustain out of policy within guidelines in policy unfounded did not happen as alleged. Unable to determine insufficient evidence. Can also have findings of officer unidentified miscellaneous, usually officer not in department anymore, and withdrawn. And that's practice to consider. And then 322, disposition of complaint must be shared with complainant, practice to consider. And then 323, findings sustain, not sustain, insufficient evidence, unfounded, not true, did not occur, action justified, lawful, justified, and proper, and summary dismissal. And that's practice to consider. Commissioner Sophia?
I don't know what I want to say, but I want to make a comment on 321 on the miscellaneous. And when it says usually the officer's not in the department anymore. That's a finding. I'm trying myself. There seems to be issues with people leaving before activities against them are brought against them. And I don't know if we would like to have that just miscellaneous, or we would like that to continue the investigation even without the person there, so that we can have a finding on it. So that's my thought. Maybe flag that for further discussion. I'm sorry, just that miscellaneous part in particular.
Thank you, Commissioner Sophia. Okay, we're gonna continue after the notes. And the next one, the next section is oversight board training. Number 311, 48 hours of training per year, and is not necessarily appropriate. 312, training by sheriff, equivalent of chief, county council, like city attorney, ride-alongs, tour police facilities, familiarize with government, code, rules, public meetings laws, state laws, officer rights, disciplinary process, police training, constitutional and civil rights law, collective bargaining agreements, diversity and inclusion, and community perspective on law enforcement, and its practice to consider. And then 313, civilian oversight board members get training and reasonable stipend for services. Vacancies will be filled within set period. And there's best practice. And then 314, CRB members will receive training on police law, investigations, criminal justice partners, the DA policies and procedures, state constitutional law, community and civil rights organization, etc. Remains to be seen. Is there any comment or questions about the notes, especially that remains to be seen? That say still in process. Commissioner Sophia? You are in mute.
I would like to flag in this for further discussion, 311.
311,
311.
okay.
I'm sorry. What was it? Yeah, hi, yeah. Thought
For-
maybe wrong. For the training, I don't think 48 hours is a lot for a year, but just to discuss that because a lot of the recommendations could be for training. So I just wanted to flag that.
Okay, and that was not necessarily appropriate, but then we will put a flag it then. Okay, Commissioner Monica?
I wanted to explain remains to be seen. I put remains to be seen because Philadelphia is still in the process of putting this together, so we haven't seen it in action yet. So I wanted to say that they haven't actually tested this out.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
Commissioner Sophia.
Commissioner.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, I didn't look at the heading for the oversight board. I thought it was for police training for 311. So sorry. So I can take that back, but I still never know. Right now, that was not my thought process. I was mistaken. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, the next one is community engagement.
Excuse me for just a moment.
Sure.
Did we skip a bunch of them?
Oh, yeah.
Findings?
No. Let me see, findings.
Yeah, I don't think we did findings or,
No, we did 300. Can you go to 320? We did 320, 219, 385. We did all those.
yes.
We
I know-
definitely did findings. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure that we did. Because
Yes,
I know initially like it kind of scrolled up and I thought we missed some, like it was about like complainants. But maybe that was further down. Like I know we just did these,
yes, we
but
did.
it's okay. We'll just go. Let's keep going.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. Community engagement. 304. Board must keep community informed of activities and receive input, including how to file a complaint without fear of retaliation. And all these are practice to consider. 305. Has non-authorized information, including for youth. 306. Irish unit teaches about board, civilians' rights, de-escalation, filing complaints. 307. Irish done at schools, libraries, community organizations, neighborhood meetings, housing authority. 308. House Youth Advisory Council, age 10 to 18. And then 309 is the only one that's for best practice, and its oversight commission solicits community input and engagement on use of force, incidents, and civil rights issues and functions as bridge between community and law enforcement. This is the only one best practice. Everything else is practice to consider. Okay, we can go to next. mediation. Okay, 293, and I can see all these are practice to consider. Mediation, division mission to improve relationship with community and improve policy. Has 130 volunteers. Civilian or officer can decide not to go forward up until it starts. 294 cases only eligible if for conduct on becoming an officer. Unwarranted action, neglect of duty. 295 mediation as alternative to investigation. 296 mediation not if there is a lawsuit, criminal case, physical injury, or property damage. 297 third-party complaints can be in mediation, but family members of victims can be even if complainants don't participate, and they're all practice to consider. Okay. We can go to the next one, 298. Okay, yeah, I asking if there is anything you wanna mention or flag? No, okay. 298. If one party rejects mediation, case is sent to investigation, and that is best practice to consider. I'm sorry. 299, mediation will include accommodations for people with disabilities and interpreters, and that's best practice. 300, either side or the mediator can determine mediation if mediation is not successful. Civilians can fail to show up 2 times before failure is declared. Parties can sign a statement of satisfaction. Officer or civilian can ask for investigation if mediation fails, and that's practice to consider. 301, no authority in charter to conduct mediation, practice to consider, and then 302, referral to mediation, best practice. Is there any of this that I just read that you have comments, Commissioner Dan?
Yeah, I think that the my flag on the no authority should have said not a good practice. And I actually noticed, you know, the word mediation does not appear in the Portland Charter Amendment. I hope that nobody construes that to mean that the board can't offer it just because it's not written in there. But that's another thing we should flag.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. And that's all for mediation. And then the next one is complaint process. 273, civilians can file commendations for officers, not necessarily appropriate. Officers with city police or other police agencies can file complaints labeled as department initiated. It's practice to consider. Anyone who witnesses or experiences misconduct can file, practice to consider. 276, complaints can be about incidents or policies, can come from people including witnesses, practice to consider. And then the only one that's best practice, 277, offer translation into various languages. Is there any comment, questions, or explanation and the ones I read? No, then we can go to Commissioner Dan. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I do want to get done with this meeting at some point, but our current system allows people to file commendations with the same body that they can file complaints with, and I don't know whether it's the same function. So I want to flag that, I've listed it as not necessarily the best practice, because I don't know if a place that's seen as the place where you complain should also take compliments or not. But it's something that we can discuss collectively down the line.
Thank you, Commissioner Dunn. Okay, the next group is 278. People who are incarcerated can file. Investigators routinely visit jails. Practice to consider. 279 can file regardless of age, immigration status, and language use. Practice to consider. 280 anonymous complaints accepted at discretion of executive director of board or board chair, depending on nature and severity of allegations, availability or evidence and workload. And this practice to consider. 281 complaints have to be in writing and signed under penalty of perjury. Not necessarily appropriate. That's the only one that's not necessarily appropriate. And then 282, the right to file a complaint is absolutely and unconditional. Practice to consider. Is there any common questions or yes, Commissioner Sophia?
Number 280. I don't know. I'd like that to be further discussed. I don't know how that would come about making that decision to accept an anonymous complaint or not. So it's just something to discuss with the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, we continue. And 283, complainant can get copy of signed complaint, no investigative files, not necessarily appropriate. 284, upon request, complainant can receive a staff recommendation, board meeting notes and decision. Have original documents returned, not necessarily appropriate. Number 285, anonymous complaints not accepted. Not necessarily appropriate. And then 286, can file if incarcerated by email or phone. Anyone can file regardless of age, citizenship, residence, criminal record, or other characteristics. Practice to consider. And 287, complainant may consult with an attorney and have a representative. Practice to consider. Commissioner Dunn?
I just want to be clear on line 284. The thing I'm concerned about wasn't that the person would get access to some of the information, but that they have to request it. That it seems like that should just be given to the complainant without them having to go through an extra hoop and say, I'd like those pieces of paper. So I think that's why I said that as not a best practice. I think that's kind of indicated in the justification.
Thank you, Commissioner Dunn. Okay, we continue. I already read 286. Yeah.
So we're at I think we're at 287 or 280.
Yes, I need to start with 287. Okay, I will start with 287. Complainant may consult with an attorney and have a representative. Practice to consider. 288, packet sent back to complainant has summarized complaint, brochure, customer survey, medical release form, and confidentiality notice. Practice to consider. 289, must agree not to sue review board. Practice to consider. 290, work arounds if signed, sworn complaint cannot be obtained but investigation appears warranted. Best practice if signed sworn complaint required by union agreements. And 291, requirements to promptly confirm receipt of complaint, provide notice to complainant if investigation cannot be completed in required 6-month period and serve final report on complainant. Best practice. Is there any comment, question? Commissioner Dunn?
I just want to flag that in line 288, the customer survey, that is something that could very much help the new review board if they make sure to include that for people who use the system.
Okay, you wanna flag it or just comment?
Yeah, I don't know what the end result is of flagging it. I just want to make sure that that doesn't get lost.
Okay, thank you.
So that would be 288, not 289. That needs to be flagged.
288.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ayomide. Okay.
Do you want me to take over?
If you want to, yes. Oh,
Or maybe another,
I can read another if you want, and then I pass it.
yeah, and then staff has their hand raised, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, just a question for item 290 for when this gets converted into text in the Word document eventually by co-chairs and staff. What exactly is the practice that is being potentially endorsed as a best practice here? Is it the idea that it can be overridden, that the requirement has an exception?
I think that question was for you, Commissioner Hamilton. That's who written that one.
This one's
No,
actually,
that was Commissioner McDonald.
Oh, yeah,
He's not here.
it's not here, so sorry about that. I just couldn't see. So we'll have to ask them when they get here. Commissioner Monica?
I guess I would just flag it for discussion so that we can discuss it later when she's around.
Yep.
Okay. Yes. Okay, a structure broadly. 269. A police commission oversees both the Department of Police Accountability and the police department. And it's practice to consider. 270, integrating 3 forms of civilian oversight: investigatory, auditing, monitoring, and holistic review functions. And it's a best practice, but function scope potentially exists under a single umbrella. Does anyone want to flag any of these two?
You weren't just at 290? I'm so confused now. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, 270.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I will pass it to you. Ayomide.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, let's see. We are officer participation, head of law enforcement agency, or their designee attends and participates, but is not a voting member of or oversight commission. This says not clear, but this model has not led to law enforcement buy-in LA. So that's the, best practices to avoid. So would anyone like to flag this item for further discussion? Commissioner Handelman.
Yeah, I think we should, and the
Nice.
board in Portland specifically cannot have any law enforcement officers on it. And so there will have to be a discussion at some point how to get law enforcement in the room if their opinions might be helpful, or make it so that officers will feel more comfortable being there, while at the same time considering having law enforcement in the room, what that will do to the community member. So I think we should flag it.
Thank you. Okay. So then I guess continuous improvement. Okay. Now I understand how I get lost. Okay. Mayor reviews procedures, surveys, complainants and witnesses, reviews statistics, and interviews staff. Seattle conducts periodic complainant experience survey, reports on the results, and develops recommendations for improving the system based on the information gathered. It looks like it's website or seattle.gov document department, seattle.gov /documents /department /OPA reports reports complainant experience report June 2021.pdf. Woo. Okay. And that's a best practice. And the one above was practice to consider. 265, require oversight commission to conduct self-evaluations every 3 years and determine whether commission should continue or change. If commission's charter is changed, require a report on change after 1 year. And this is a best practice. Would anyone like to flag this item for further discussion or have any comments or questions? Commissioner Sophia?
On 265, I'm thinking about, I agree that it's a good practice, but I don't know if in 3 years is appropriate, or I mean, at least at the beginning, I would think that you might want to do that every year. And then as time goes on, maybe put it up to 3 years. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, let's go to the next section. Okay, it looks like we are at 251, subpoena power and compelling testimony. All these are considered best practices, or excuse me, practices to consider. Board can subpoena witnesses and documents. Officers issued notice and order to appeal. Failure to appeal can result in discipline. Statement read to officer about constitutional rights against self-incrimination, but if they refuse to answer the question, they can be fired. Or does not have direct access to body camera footage, even though manufacturer Axon allows access by settings preference. And last but not least, board can subpoena evidence and reports. These are all practices to consider. Would anyone like to flag any of these items for further discussion, or are there any comments or questions about these 5? Don't see anyone. Okay, thank you very much. Next chunks, so through 357, yeah. Three. Okay. Charter allows board to require attendance of witnesses, prompt cooperation from officers who are required to respond to written questions and appear at interviews and hearings, not necessary or appropriate. Citizen Review Board has subpoena power and gets access to all files and evidence. They are allowed to go to the crime scene and gather information independently. That's a best practice. Police are required to be present at hearing proceedings, investigations. It is part of their subpoena power, and that's also a best practice. And then for 260, Oakland's system has an independent commission with authority to hire and fire civilian agency director, police chief, and inspector general. It also has independent legal counsel, the final say in findings and discipline, subpoena power, and the power to compel testimony. Oakland's system took years to develop and is still getting off the ground. They need additional staffing and better division between internal affairs and civil agency investigation. They are working towards shifting more investigations over to civilian agency. And that says best practices in the works. And then 261, broad subpoena power plus duty of all employees, including high-level management, to cooperate, and failure is grounds for termination. Commissioner Handelman.
So I didn't flag this because I know this is going to end up in discussion anyway, but the difference between subpoenaing an officer and compelling them to testify is really important for us to understand as we're designing the board. That, you know, this is one of the things where Fifth Amendment was mentioned somewhere. So I'm hoping that we maybe somebody can explain what it means about Philadelphia being able to subpoena officers. Because if you subpoena an officer, and this happened under the old Portland system, they can fold their arms and say, I plead the fifth. But if you compel them to testify and say, if you don't testify, you're fired, then that's the power to compel. And also just number 260, I think that might have been moved around when I was doing the original categorization. It seems like that can be broken into different chunks to fit into different sections, because it does. The only thing about power to compel testimony is really appropriate for this section. Thanks.
Okay, where are we at? Thank you. Hearing process. These are all practices to consider. Three-member board panel reviews evidence, asks if thorough, fair, and impartial, may agree with proposed findings or not. If there is a disagreement, this is 216, full board considers case, can send back for more investigation or to mayor to make findings. 217, officer gets notice of hearing and can request supporting documents if there are no sustained findings. Receives documents automatically if there are sustained findings. 218, board members may ask to be removed from a case if they have a conflict of interest. 219, three-member board panel review investigation, one mayor appointee, one council appointee, one city commissioner appointee. Any questions, comments? Anyone like to flag for further discussion? Any of these items? Okay, let's move on. Okay, panel can make findings or refer cases to full board. Findings are sent to police commissioner with forms and background information. That's 221, 222. After initial hearing, after initial hearing, case may be forwarded to an administrative trial. If so, complainant has to sign a statement. 223, administrative trial includes CCRB, prosecuting attorneys, or police department advocate officer, office, heard by an administrative judge. 224, officer can cut a plea deal with board, but commissioners can reject it and send to a hearing. These are all, well, 3 are not necessary or appropriate, and 1 is practice to consider. 224 is the practice to consider. Any comments, questions, flagged? Anyone would like to flag any of these for discussion in the future? Okay. Thank you. All right. Okay, 225. If the officer is retiring or about to be promoted, the case can be expedited. 226. Board can recommend suspending officer while charges are pending. And these are considered practices to consider. Let's see. 227. Board can dismiss complaint in part or in whole. Refer for more investigation, defer action, or hear case. 228, decisions on case made by majority vote. 229, findings sent to officer, agency, county board of supervisors. Commissioner Handelman.
So I just got done reading a 210-page document by the compliance officer that examines whether Portland's in compliance with the DOJ settlement agreement from 2012. And in there, there's a thing that says sometimes the investigations of deadly force cases are being delayed because the officers are on paid administrative leave, so they can't be called in to testify because they have to be paid for their time. Now, I've never heard that before, and especially because the officers who are involved have to be interviewed within 48 hours. So I don't know exactly what they were referring to, but I just, in terms of having the board say whether they think the officer should be suspended while the case is being investigated, we have to ensure that that doesn't mean the officer can't be called in to testify because they're on leave. I hope that makes sense. You hear what I'm saying? I just want to flag that and make sure we don't make a mistake by saying, yeah, the officer's on leave. Well, now we can't investigate the case. So there's got to be some middle ground somehow.
So, Commissioner Handelman, you're wanting to flag that particular. I can't see the number off it right now just because it's the screen share, but yeah. Yes, 226. Yeah, 226. Thank you. Let's see. 230. If board members dissent, they can include information with findings by submitting within 5 days. This is a practice can consider. The next 4, 5 are practices to consider. 231. Investigative hearing can be held by a panel of 3 board members to send recommendations to full board, can be requested by complainant, officer, executive director, or board member, can be done to include new evidence, to question staff reports, to advance public confidence, or if an in-person hearing will help. Panel recommendations can be filed by full board. 232, excuse me. Officer can plead no contents before hearing, which is binding. 233, board cannot comment on substance of complaint while case is pending. 234, hearing needs to be noticed 10 days in advance. These are practices to consider. Commissioner Iona?
So how does the one about the no contest, how is that different than that stipulated discipline thing I've read about, where it sounds like the officer says, yeah, I did it, and I know this is what's going to happen as a result, and then that takes care of then the matter's ended then. Since that's San Diego, Commissioner Handelman, maybe you know the difference. I mean, what's similar about them?
Right. Well, I think the difference in Portland is that there is no review board that would hear the case if the officer. I mean, well, I guess there is. It's before the police review board, so it's very similar. It's very, very similar. What you're describing, yeah.
Okay.
The thing
Because
that
I read in some, I forgot which years. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, if you see the justification there, the thing that concerns me about that is, let's say that a review board, while they're looking at the case, says, hey, wait a minute, this officer also, cussed at the person or whatever. That's something that wasn't found in the initial investigation. Then the officer can use that plea deal to avoid being found out of policy for some other things that weren't part of the initial investigation. So it's, it's kind of a double-edged sword, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah. Okay.
In your hands to let Mr. Handelman. Yeah, I just always want to make sure you put it down, so when it comes up, I can see you. Great. Where did we leave off? First, just want to make sure there was any other further discussion for any of the other jurisdictions. Okay, great. All right, 235, officer and officer and complainant can make opening statements. Chair presiding members begin questioning of witnesses. Officers, representatives, and staff can ask questions. Officer or complainant can ask for a panel to ask more questions. Officer and complainant can make closing statements. This is practices to consider. 236 is also a practice to consider. If further investigation is needed, hearing can be continued. Let's see. 237, hearing is not open to the public. This is not necessary or appropriate. That's the, and then also, 238, investigative hearing report is sent to complainant and officer before hearing. 239, hearings are recorded, transcripts may be available. These are both practices to consider. And then 240, rules of evidence. If responsible persons are accustomed to using such information in serious affairs, includes hearsay, and that's also a practice to consider. Any comments, questions, flagging of any of these items for further discussion? Staff.
Just a clarifying question. In item 236, does the word continued there mean essentially extended in the legal sense? Like a continuance? Or-
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Yeah, Well, it means it can be put off so it can be picked up at another time, and continued at another hearing. So, want to rephrase that to be more clear? That's great. I'm also, while I have the floor, it's almost 9 o'clock. I'm happy to keep going with this. I want to see all these things, but I don't know what our plans are.
We're actually going to finish this chunk and then go to public comment and then adjourn. So you're right on target, Mr. Handelman. Okay, let's see here. 241, and this one, the next two are not necessarily appropriate. Complainant or officer can call witnesses, introduce exhibits, cross-examine, impeach witnesses, rebut. Officers can be called for cross-examination even if they did not testify. Oh, that is considered best practice. That's 241. 242 and 243 are considered not appropriate. And that would be officer has access to evidence unless prohibited by law, and testimony is taken under oath. 244, complainant can have representation and or attorney. 245, interpreters can be provided, but 7-day notice is needed. And that's considered a best practices. 244 and 245. Any comments, questions, any flagging of any of these items for further discussion? Commissioner Glenn.
Yeah, I'm looking at 241 and I'm trying to decipher the difference between calling a witness and impeaching a witness.
Commissioner Handelman.
Well, I think, if you call a witness, they come up to the stand, and if you feel like their testimony isn't valid, I don't know if you all saw the article in the Willamette Week about the Brady list, but if you feel like the witness's testimony should not be included, then you impeach them and say, you have to disavow everything that you heard from this witness because they're not trustworthy or something along those lines.
Thank you, Commissioner Handelman. Okay. 246. Hearing can be held even if parties fail to appear. That is practice to consider. 247, while investigative hearing panels are made of 3 members, the full board hears death and other cases, a minimum of 6 people out of 11 needed. These are best practices. These are practices to consider. 248, board members cannot serve to hear a case if they have a conflict, family or friend of party witness, even financial interest or bias. 249, trial boards consist of 3 members, 1 police officer of equal rank to the subject officer selected by the police chief, 1 civilian chosen by the Civilian Police Accountability Board, and 1 administrative law judge selected by the chief county administrator. And that's a best practice. This other one is about the 250 is also a best practice. And our last, a civilian administrative charge committee shall review the investigation and make a determination that the subject officer shall be or shall not be administratively charged. Yeah. And that's a best practice. Commissioner Handelman.
I would just want to flag those two because those are things that I would definitely have put as things to consider and not best practices, because we're talking about having a board with a police officer on it, and that's not part of the Portland system. So I want to flag both of those.
Commissioner Lavisa.
Sure, I just want to say I agree with Dan. I didn't break things into best practices versus practices to consider, but I'm happy to consider those practices to consider.
Okay, and I think we are done for now. This is the last section. Yes, this is the end of the category, so we'll move. If first of all, if there's any questions or comments from the commission before I move to public comment. Okay. Oh, Commissioner Iona.
Sorry, a little slow there. So then be great if before we end the meeting, if we could hear from the co-chairs about our next meeting. Are we going to just continue on this so we know what to be prepared for? It'd be great to know that. Thanks.
I'd like to say that, yes, we will continue on this. We will be working. I know that there's some additional practices to be put into the spreadsheet. So that will be compiled too. We will have another more cleaned up copy. The goal is to go back to some of the ones for further discussion next week as well. So we can decide what we want to do as a group with those. This is all to culminate for us to get a draft of the written report for submission to the full commission. So we'll be working on a draft for you all next time, as well as going through these as to what it might look like for the full commission to vote on. I'd like to ask staff if there's something I missed, because I know staff has been working on some things. Go ahead.
Yeah, so first, thank you to the members of the commission and of the subcommittee who put in so much effort into the spreadsheet in particular. We didn't get to the Word document today, and that's okay. There was some work done there, and there'll be much more done by the next meeting to have the items that are in the spreadsheet but not yet in the Word document put in, as well as a couple items that were missed into the spreadsheet as well as the document. And there are a few members who have done a lot of work of research, but that's not yet reflected in the spreadsheet. So if it's possible to get that included as soon as possible, that'll help ensure that there's enough time to incorporate all of it and get it out with enough time for members to read it. And have time to reflect and process prior to the next meeting. As a reminder, the next meeting of the subcommittee is Monday, August 29th, a week from today at 7 p.m.
Thank you, staff. Commissioner Iona.
All right, a little bit more question. So we went through these. I mean, we have more to go, but like we haven't. Are we going to look at all of the options under these different categories? And as a group, think about, oh, we think this is the best approach? Are we going to present all of these options under each of these categories to the full commission? So that's one question. And then the second question is, and then how is the public going to be brought into this conversation? So those are my two questions. Thanks.
So the public is brought into the conversation as we always have with the public comment. And then go backwards to yes, we will be finishing up. Excuse me, finishing up, adding these. So let me. I think I missed your first question, Debbie.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Okay, so so I guess what I'm asking is, okay, so we went through these categories and we're sort of like, oh yeah, you know, this is, we want to consider this. But under each of the categories, there's like 9 different ways that you can do that sort of thing. So what I'm curious about is then, are we as a subcommittee going to sort through those different options under that category and say, oh, we think this is the best way for like us, for our board in Portland to select its members, for example. I'm just making that up. But so, or are we going to give to the full commission, we want all these elements in our thing, but here are all the options under each of those categories, or are we going to narrow them down before we hand it to the full commission?
we are going to narrow those down as a subcommittee.
Okay,
That would just be way over, it would be way too much for the full commission to sort through, not having the background, the details that we have. So yes, as a subcommittee, we'll be looking at, you know, what are our top practices that we would recommend. We're not getting rid of any of them. We're going to keep them all on the spreadsheet. But we want to say, out of all of the stuff that we've done, these are the things that stand out most that we feel are most appropriate for our commission, our board, our new board. So as recommendations, but it's not mutually exclusive. And as I said before, this is a work progress. You know, we're going to be seeing things as we go through other phases of our work. We're going to see all kinds of things. Airplanes is her favorite. Sorry. But anyway, I'll stop while she's talking. Sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner Glenn and Commissioner Iona. Let's go to public comment. We will take public comment on the issues of the subcommittee, issues the subcommittee is discussing, or community members can also tell their story about policing and police accountability. We ask members of the public to keep their comments and questions to 2 minutes in length and raise their hand in Zoom if you'd like to speak. I don't see any hands. Okay, well, thank you for members of the audience who are here. And we're going to conclude our meeting. Just want to check in with a garden block if this is a time for co-chairs, facilitators to summarize any items brought up today which didn't fit into the agenda, today's agenda. We'll recap those items here, use them to develop future agendas. We will not be using this time to add new items not previously mentioned or to discuss them. We will use this list to develop future agendas so that items can be discussed. So first of all, Victoria, do you have anything to recap for the
Yes.
block?
I only have 2 things. I had 3, but one was already discussed and clarified. I have 2. I have to bring the distinction between subpoena and compel. And the second is ensuring pay leave pending suspension does not prevent officers giving a statement. Those are the only 2. Thank you.
Co-chairs or staff?
Nothing from staff.
Okay.
Either.
Okay, thank you. With that, we'll adjourn. Thank you. Thank you to all the members who attended today's meeting and your contribution today. Thank you to all the interpreters supporting access to the meeting of the Police Accountability Commission and its subcommittees for all Portlanders. Thank you to briefers for coming and spending time and sharing with us, but it's just y'all lovely commissioners. So thank you for all that. Thank you to members of the public for being here, contributing your questions and thoughts. You can give written public comment in advance of future meetings at tinyurl.com/Portland PAC comment. You can sign up for email updates on Portland Accountability Commission at tinyurl.com/Portland PAC updates. It is now 9:11 and meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much for your time.